Very good. Who gave him that?
Why does this look green screened in? What the f? Something is so weird about the... Whatever.
Very good. Who gave him that line? Do you think I can use that?
Yes. And in fact, Mr. President, you have 350 million people to liberate. Yes. But to liberate 350 million people, you have to imprison some. That's the way it works, right? You cannot just free the criminals and think crime's going to go down magically. You have to imprison them so you can liberate 350 million Americans that are asking for the end of crime and the end of terrorism. And it can be done. I mean, you're doing it already. And I'm sure that people have seen the change in the streets. A long way to go because you're just initiating your second term. But it's clear that, with the numbers...
You still stuck on this planet? No. I'm good now.
Democrat-run cities, they get a help from the work you're doing. So I'm really happy to be here, honored, and eager to help.
Well, we had a terrible thing happen. We had an administration that allowed people to
Biden, yes,
come in freely into our country from not only South America, but from all over the world. Many from the Congo in Africa, Asia, all over the world, Europe, rough parts of Europe. And they came from prisons, and they came from mental institutions, and they came from gangs, and the gangs of Venezuela and other places. And hundreds of thousands and even millions of them came. 21 million people altogether, but many of the people that came, just a tremendous percentage of them were criminals, in some cases violent criminals. We had 11,088 known murderers. Half of them murdered more than one person. This was allowed by a man
murders. Damn.
Who, what he did to our country is just unbelievable. So we're straightening it out. We're getting them out. But what they did and what that party did to our country, open borders, anybody could come in. As soon as I heard that, I said, every prison's going to be emptied out into our country.
And that's exactly what they did.
And we're straightening it out. And we just had numbers. We had the highest recruiting numbers in the history of our country going into police departments. And a year ago, we had the lowest numbers. You couldn't hire a biggest change. Yeah. Nobody's ever
the lowest of the highest.
And the military now, Marines, the Army, Air Force, Coast Guard.
They should ask the guy, why'd you send all your prisoners to my country, bro? You should ask him this year.
Every slot is, I mean, we have the best numbers we've ever had. We call it recruitment numbers. And we've never had anything like it. We had records on at every single level. But very important, the policemen. The policemen are joining forces now that we're having a hard time with policemen because we weren't protecting our police. Yeah. And we cherish our police. The police are great, and the firemen and everybody else. But we have the highest numbers that we've ever had, the most enthusiasm. Great enthusiasm and on trade and other things. We're doing great. We're taking in billions and billions of dollars. We made 2 weeks ago, I gave them a little bit of a pause because, you have to show a little flexibility. We go back to
flexibility.
What we have to do. The markets have been very strong once they got used to it. But
markets have been very strong. Which markets?
$2 billion a day.
What is this? There's a Wall Street bets trader? What are we talking about? Where are my strong markets at again?
Now we're making $3 billion a day. We're a great country, but we had stupid people running this country, and I can say
making $3 billion a day. We're just making so much money constantly from all these imaginary places.
Should never and can never be forgotten. It's a sin what they did, and you are helping us out, and we appreciate it.
Actually, what you're doing with the border is remarkable. It has dropped 95%. It's incredible.
Okay. As of this morning, 99%.
99.1%. That's crazy.
Why are those numbers not in the media?
Yeah, why aren't they in the media?
With the fake news, like CNN over here doesn't want to put them out because they don't like putting out good numbers. They only like putting out because I think they hate our country actually.
Ooh.
Yeah,
but it's a shame.
They hate our country.
Isn't that a great question? Why doesn't the media? Why don't they put out numbers?
Yeah, 99%. I mean, it's crazy, right?
We're doing
it's a crazy turnaround.
Christy, could you maybe say a couple of words about the border? How we're doing?
It's just been absolutely phenomenal what a great leader can do. Clear direction. Our laws matter. We should only have people in our country that love us, and the Border Patrol and our ICE officers and law enforcement officers have done fantastic work. So we're proud of them. Now we just need to get
So
the
based.
criminals and murderers and rapists and dangerous gang members and terrorist organizations out of our country. So, Mr. President Bukele, we thank you very much for your partnership. It has been wonderful for us to be able to have somewhere to send the worst of the worst and someone to partner with. And we'd like to continue that partnership because it's been a powerful message of consequences. Mr. President, you wanted people to know that there was consequences if you break our laws and harm our people
And now
and
they
endanger
know.
Families.
You might not even get due
This is a clear
process.
consequence for the worst of the worst that we have somewhere to put them.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we even had this gang member from Venezuela, one of the ones you sent, and we interviewed him just to get some information, etc. from them. And he said, "Oh well, I got arrested 6 times, but they released me the 6 times, so I should be released again." And then he said, "Well, what's the last thing you do?" And he said, "Well, I shot a cop in the leg, but I didn't kill him. I just shot him in the leg." And we're like, this guy was arrested 6 times here in the United States, 6
Wow.
times. He was released 6 times, and in the he was released 5 times, and the last time he was sent to El Salvador, right? So he's not getting released. But the last time he shot a cop, actually, and he shot him in the leg. So these are,
That's crazy, chat.
like you said, there's something broken.
The liberal establishment.
So it's fucking
But they're
liberal.
not
It's
running
always the
things
liberals.
anymore in this country, and we're run by, and I don't say conservative, I don't say anything, we're run by people with great common sense.
Yeah, common sense.
Because it's all common sense. It's not liberal conservative, it's common sense.
Common sense. True.
Like, do you allow men to play in women's sports? Do you allow
Oh,
men
the
to
girl
box your women in
dick,
boxing? A lot of
That's
boxing.
that's violence.
That's abuse of a
Violence
woman.
against women.
It's abuse of a woman. But we have people that fight to the death because they think men should be able to play in women's sports. And some of those sports, it wouldn't matter much, but it still matters. But some of them are very dangerous for women.
Some years ago, like you said, a decade ago or so, women rights movements were pressuring so that we enacted specific laws to avoid men abusing women. And I think those laws were brave because there were a lot of men abusing women. But now some of the same people are trying to backtrack on that and actually trying to make new laws allowing men to abuse women in sports. So actually, that doesn't
You do
make
it in
sense.
sports.
It doesn't make sense.
It's
You
fucked
know,
up,
they have
dog.
weightlifting records, right?
Yeah.
A woman gets up this way, she's incredible. A guy gets up and beats her by 100 pounds. What are you going to do? A record that hadn't been broken in 18 years. They put on an ounce, quarter of an ounce, eighth of an ounce for 18 years. Now they have a guy come up, ping. The whole thing is crazy.
Unbelievable.
But they continue to fight. And I don't like talking about it because I want to save it for just before the next election. I said, my people, don't even talk about it because they'll change. And but I watched this morning. There was a congressman fighting to the death for men to play against women in sports. And you say to yourself, why?
What does he mean by next election?
What are they doing? But your country's not too big in that.
Surely.
No, of course not.
Surely, he's
We're
jesting.
protecting women.
Don't worry, guys.
That's right.
It's all memes over here.
Important form of protection, too.
And as you can see, most of my cabinet are women. So
That's impressive.
yeah.
That's why you're
And they're
running.
not DEI hires or anything.
Oh,
They're
no
just great at what
DEI.
they do.
Yes.
That's right. This is very impressive.
Very
This is the first.
impressive.
We've had women.
It's always interesting whether we're talking about Orban or whether we're talking about North Korea. It's always interesting who Trump chooses to compliment and who he admires most. Like, yes, El Salvador, the model country for the United States. When I was thinking in the election, who am I going to vote for? I was thinking, who would make my country so much better? And you know what? Knowing that Donald Trump just wants us to be more like the great country of El Salvador, that's exactly what the U.S. should be striving for sure.
But we've never had 3 of them right here. That's
4 and 3
And
men.
look at what we have. You guys feel a little bit mistreated? That's good. I like it. We've been advanced. I've been very advanced in that.
Let me
regard.
introduce you to this guy who runs Doge. You won't believe how much family this dude has. This guy is making so many kids, they got to make them in laboratories.
We have Pam, who's been so fantastic. Christy, and the most powerful woman they say
I
anywhere.
know, exactly. They're all afraid of
Susie Wells, they say, oh, she's tough. Most powerful woman in the world, according to magazines. What do I know? But I think she probably is.
Yeah.
She probably is.
Congratulations.
And you know, Stephen, who's done such a great job.
Thank you, sir.
Miller, the Nazi.
We have great people.
Great. We got
But we love
great
working
people.
with him. He really lets them have it. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
There's no games.
No. It's very good.
He knows. Do you have any questions, please?
President Trump.
No, let's not start
Mr.
with
President.
CNN.
Let's not start with CNN.
Mr. President.
It's fake news.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. You repeatedly mentioned last night that Russia's attack on Ukraine was a mistake. What is the exact mistake? And have you given
The mistake is they
Putin
didn't
a
ask me
deadline
first.
to actually move toward a ceasefire?
The mistake was letting the war happen.
Oh.
If Biden were competent, and if Zelensky
we're
were
talking about
competent,
Biden.
and I don't know that he is. We had a rough session with this guy over here. He just kept asking for more and more. That war should have never been allowed to happen.
Yeah, Zelensky,
That war,
true.
I went 4 years and Putin wouldn't even bring it up. And as soon as the election was rigged and I wasn't here, that war started. There was no way that war should have been allowed to happen. And Biden should have stopped it. And you take a look at Putin. I'm not saying anybody's an angel, but I will tell you, I went 4 years and it wasn't even a question. He would never, and I told him, don't do it. You're not going to do it. And it was the apple of his eye, but there was no way that he would have done it.
The apple of
All
his
you had to do
eye.
is lower oil prices. If you lowered oil prices, Biden kept the prices so high because he made it impossible to get it. If you lowered oil prices, you would have never had the war. But you wouldn't have had it with me anyway. That war would have never happened. And I think it's a great abuse. So now what do? You get a country where 25% of its land is gone, and the best locations, where millions of people are killed. You know, you haven't reported accurately
True.
the death. And this was Biden's
All the
war,
media
and
are
I'm
lying.
trying to stop it. And I think we're going to do a good job.
Is there anyone
I
in the
hope
media
we're
that
gonna
doesn't
do.
just fucking
They lose
lie
2,500
constantly?
young
Anybody?
people a week, think on average. Now they're Russians and they're Ukrainians, but it's 2,000. We don't care. It's like whatever it is. They're not from your country. They're not from mine. But I want to stop it. 2,500. It's a killing field. It's like the Civil War. You take a look. I look at the satellite pictures. This should not be happening in our time. Of course, our time can be pretty violent, as we know. But that's a war that should have never been allowed to start. And Biden could have stopped it, and Zelensky could have stopped it, and Putin should have never started it. Everybody's to blame.
Except
Have you
me.
spoken to President Zelensky, sir, about his offer to purchase more Patriot missile batteries?
Oh, I don't know. He's always looking to purchase missiles. You know, he's against. Listen, when you start a war, you got to know that you can win the war, right? You don't start a war against somebody that's 20 times your size, and then hope that people give you some missiles. If we didn't give them what we gave, remember, I gave
I don't
them
need this,
javelins.
right? I don't think
That's
I
how
do.
they won their first big battle with the tanks that got stuck in the mud, and they took them out with javelins. They have an expression that Obama at the time, Obama gave them sheets and Trump gave them javelins.
Did you call it a civil war? Oh, civil war is the Russian talking point of there was a civil war going on in the Donbass, and then Ukrainians started genociding Russian-speaking, Russian ethnic people, and that's why Russia had to intervene.
But there's something that should have never happened. It's a really shame. The towns are destroyed. Towns and cities are, largely destroyed. They have the spires, the beautiful spires that go up. They say they were the most beautiful in the world in Ukraine for whatever reason, but the most beautiful in the world, they're mostly laying on their side, shattered and broken. And most importantly, you have millions of people dead. Millions of people dead because of 3 people. I would say 3 people. Let's
Biden,
say
Zelensky?
Putin, number 1.
Oh, okay.
But let's say Biden, who had no idea what
Yep,
the hell he
and
was
Zelensky.
doing. Number
him.
2, and Zelensky.
Yeah.
And all I can do is try and stop it. That's all I want to do. I want to stop the killing. And I think we're doing well in that regard. I think you'll have some very good proposals very soon.
Last question, sir. Have you attributed a motive, sir?
Didn't even say
Have you
Putin. No, yeah,
attributed
Putin.
a motive
It was
to that
Putin, Biden, and Zelensky.
investigation behind the attack on Governor Josh Shapiro over the weekend?
No, I haven't, but
Who
The
cares?
attacker was not a fan of Trump, I understand, just from what I read and from what I've been told.
Oh, yeah.
The attacker basically wasn't a fan of anybody. It's probably just a whack job.
True.
And certainly a thing like that cannot be allowed to happen.
Relation with President Bukele, the best guarantee that this time you won't terminate the temporary
I have
protected
a
status.
great relationship with this man. I have the best relationship with him. We've known each other. I've known him since he was a very young man, as I said, very, very young, and I was impressed. I said, look at this guy is. In fact, you sort of look like a teenager. You look like a teenager. I said, what
I
kind
don't
of
know
a
if that's
country
good
is
or bad,
this?
Mr. President.
He grew up well in the last 5 years.
Do you support an extension for nationals of El Salvador under temporary
support
protected
him.
status?
Do you plan to ask him? Do you
I support him. I like how we just don't answer questions anymore. That's a good one. Good one. Just don't answer anything.
Let's hear the question from this very low-rated anchor at CB.
Thank you, President. Do you plan to ask President
Low
Bukele
rating.
to help return the man who your administration says was mistakenly
Which one is that?
deported? The man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador?
Well, let me ask Pam, would you answer that question?
Sure, President. First and foremost, he was illegally in our country. He had been illegally in our country. And in 2019, two courts, an immigration court and an appellate immigration court, ruled that he was a member of MS-13 and he was illegally in our country. Right now, it was additional paperwork had needed to be done. That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us. The Supreme Court.
Okay, real quick. Abrego Garcia. So in 2019, an immigration judge granted him withholding of removal status, a rare alternative to asylum, over the threat to his life from gang violence, because he came over illegally in 2011 at the age of 16, 2011. He was living with his wife and child, both American citizens. He's never been charged with or convicted of any crime in either country. Wait, so what was the...
It was a paperwork.
Well, let me ask Pam, would you answer that question?
Sure, President. First and foremost, he was illegally in our country. He had been illegally in our country. And in 2019, two courts, an immigration court and an appellate immigration court, ruled that he was a member of MS-13 and he was illegally in our country.
So it seems like he did have permission to be here, assuming the wiki is correct, that he had his withholding of removal status. When they say they ruled him to be part of a gang, my guess is it was just in a court filing that he was a member of a gang or something. But that's not illegal. And we don't know if he was actively participating in it, especially if he said he had apparently has a wife and child who are both American citizens and hasn't been convicted with any crimes. So based. Okay, good one.
Right now, it was additional paperwork had needed to be done. That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not.
Hi, what's up?
Hey, my stream is always a little bit behind yours. Did you reach a conclusion about how they determined him to be in a gang?
My guess is going to be courts write a whole bunch of stuff and a whole bunch of motions and a whole bunch of rulings and stuff all the time. So they might have just had like that. Oh, might have been in a gang or whatever. But it's not like I don't know if that was like a subject of intense scrutiny or investigation.
My understanding is that that's not entirely wrong, but my understanding is that that the government put forward kind of an assertion that he was in a gang, some very, very, very loose evidence that he was a part of that gang, and then his lawyer never responded to that, essentially never disproving it. So
wait.
since
For
it
which
wasn't a
case?
threat, for whenever they were determining whether or not he could stay.
Oh, the
in
2019
America.
thing.
Yes.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So what happened is, so then it went to the appellate court because he's like, well, no, I'm not in a gang. And the appellate court goes, well, we can't actually do anything about that because you didn't present any evidence at the lower court, and you can't present in the way that it worked. he couldn't present new evidence at that point either. He was just appealing the decision of the judge to find him in a gang, and they're like, well, the judge wasn't wrong because there was no evidence showing you weren't in the gang, and all he had was evidence showing you were in the gang. Even if it was slight, it's not an abusive, I don't know if it's de novo or abuse of discretion standard, but whatever the standard is, the judge didn't violate that standard in finding him in the gang.
Sure. I think that there's probably a really silly game that's being played here, and that whether or not he is or isn't in the gang probably didn't matter that much, would be my guess, right? But now that we've got a law that can go back and say, well, because he was, now he's getting deported, there's a chance, I'm guessing, that that judge might have looked at it a bit differently, or that they would have had a higher standard to make this type of determination, or...
I can't make that statement right now, but what I can say is that there was something then that said, even with these findings, he is not to be deported at this time.
Yeah.
And that was what was right. So like, that's kind of the, so, and in their most recent filing to the court in this case, there were two filings that I saw. One was just the Department of Justice saying, yeah, we saw what the Supreme Court said, but we don't care and we're not going to do it. They're sticking to this line, and they're going to take that to the Supreme Court as well, I assume, saying that, well, even though we said it was an administrative error, even though we said that publicly and in court, actually it wasn't, and we had the right to deport him. And then there was a filing of an affidavit from the head of, either the head or the deputy head of deportation, because they were required to provide a statement from the government showing how they're facilitating his return. Mm-hmm. And in that statement, the head of the department or deputy head just says, we're not doing anything, and there's no update, which is contemptible and could have other implications, blah, blah, blah. But they're very clearly sticking to this line that Pam Bondi is saying right now.
Yeah, because this is the thing that, this was our 9-0 Supreme Court decision, right? That's
exactly.
What this is the subject of, which is all agreed that the lower court is correct. And this is for, I think Boasberg is the one writing these, right? That you have to bring it back. And then, this
is not Boasberg.
This isn't Boasberg. Oh, no, Zini or whatever. What is it?
Yeah, Xenia.
This is the one where they showed up on day one, or after the Supreme Court gave that 9-0 decision, they showed up and they didn't have any information or anything to say about how they were trying to get him back. And then the judge said, yeah, okay, well, you need to give me daily updates on what's going on. Right. And then they just haven't filed anything other than, I think they said they think he's alive.
Yeah, I think he's alive. And then, like I said, those two recent things of just, we're not going to do it. And so, spoiler alert, sorry, everybody, in this very press conference, Miller is about to get up and tell Trump that the Supreme Court ruled in his favor. Yeah, Marco's face is particularly good. I had some other stuff I wanted to talk to you about, but I see you're in the middle of something. Should I just come back when you're done with this video?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Bye.
To us, the Supreme Court ruled, President, that if, as El Salvador wants to return, and this is international matters, foreign affairs, if they wanted to return...
The reason why she's saying, this is international matters, foreign affairs, is to try to invoke some power that that the government has, that is unquestionable by the court. That's why she's bringing that up very specifically, because this administration doesn't like to be questioned by the courts.
Turn him, we would facilitate it, meaning provide a plane. So will you return him?
And you are doing a great job. Thank you.
you.
Wait a minute. Can you just also respond to that question? Because, it's asked by CNN, and they always ask it with a slant, because they're totally slanted, because they don't know what's happening. That's why nobody's watching them. But would you answer that question?
Those ratings, man.
Gladly. So, as Pam mentioned, there's an illegal alien from El Salvador. So, with respect to you, he's a citizen of El Salvador. So, it's very arrogant even for American media to suggest that we would even tell El Salvador how to handle their own citizens as a starting point. As two immigration courts found that he was a member of MS-13. When President Trump declared MS-13 to be a foreign terrorist organization,
this is Himmler or whatever, the combined, this guy, the Stephen Miller dude, is an evil, disgusting human being. This guy is one of the worst human beings in the United States at this point in time.
That meant that he was no longer eligible under federal law, which I'm sure you know, you're very familiar with the INA, that he was no longer eligible for any form of immigration relief in the United States. So he had a deportation order that was valid, which meant that under our law, he's not even allowed to be present in the United States and had to be returned because of the foreign terrorist designation. This issue was then,
That's all a lie.
by a district court judge, completely inverted, and a district court judge tried to tell the administration that they had to kidnap a citizen of El Salvador and fly him back here. That issue was raised to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said the district court order was unlawful, and its main components were reversed 9-0 unanimously, stating clearly it's going to kidnap a citizen of El Salvador and fly him back here. That issue was raised to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said the district court order was unlawful, and its main components were reversed 9-0 unanimously, stating clearly that neither Secretary of State nor the President could be compelled by anybody to forcibly retrieve a citizen of El Salvador from El Salvador, who again is a member of MS-13, which, as I'm sure you understand, rapes little girls, murders women, murders children, is engaged in the most barbaric activities in the world, and I can promise you, if he was your neighbor, you would move right away.
So you don't plan
But
to
the
ask for
Supreme
any
Court's
money to get him
asking
back?
to,
And
that-
what was the ruling
is that your
in the Supreme Court, Steve? Was it 9-0?
Yes, it was a 9-0
In our favor.
in our favor against
It wasn't in their favor at all, but okay.
the district court ruling, saying that no district court has the power to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. As Pam said, the ruling solely stated that if this individual at El Salvador's sole discretion was sent back to our country, that we could deport him a
discretion.
second time.
Well,
No version of this legally ends up with him ever living here because he is a citizen of El Salvador. That is the president of El Salvador. Your questions about it, per the court, can only be directed to him.
I asked.
Aren't they being pretty stupid, doubling and tripling down on this shit while it's still being worked out? What do you mean? The only two people that can decide whether or not that guy comes back are in the room right now, and it's the President Bukaki and President Orange Kaki. If they decide not to have the guy back, then unless he gets either cooed violently or impeached and leaves afterwards, that's just nothing's changing for them.
¿Se lo liberaría,
What is
Presidente Bukele?
can President Bukele weigh in on this? Do you plan to return him?
Well, I'm suppose you're not suggesting that I smuggle a terrorist into the United States, right?
It's always
how can I return him to the United States? Like, I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
So you can release him inside El Salvador?
Yeah, but I'm not releasing. I mean, we're not very fond of releasing terrorists into our country. I mean, we just turned the murder capital of the world into the safest country of the Western Hemisphere, and you want us to go back into the releasing criminals so we can go back to being the murder capital of the world? No, that's not going to happen.
Well, they'd love to have a criminal, released into our
I mean,
country.
there's a fascination.
They would love it.
Yeah.
They're sick. These are sick people. Marco, do you have something to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, Stephen outlined it. I don't understand what the confusion is. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin. Except for Venezuela, that wasn't refusing to take people back, or places like that. I can tell you this, Mr. President. No, the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President of the United States, not by a court. And no court in the United States has a right to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. It's that simple. End of story.
And that's what the Supreme Court held, by the way, to Marco's point. The Supreme Court said exactly what Marco said, that no court has the authority to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. We won a case 9-0, and people like CNN are portraying it as a loss, as usual, because they want foreign terrorists in the country who kidnap women and children. But President Trump, his policy is foreign terrorists that are here illegally get expelled from the country, which, by the way, is a 90-10 issue.
Well, Mr. President, you said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago, and they said that it must be facilitated.
Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over? And that's why nobody watches you anymore. You have no credibility.
The ratings.
Please go ahead.
President Trump, thank you so much. How many illegal criminals are you planning on exporting to El Salvador? And President Bukele, how many are you willing to take from the U.S.?
As many as possible. And I just asked the president, it's this massive complex that he built, jail complex. I said, can you build some more of them, please? As many as we can get out of our country that were allowed in here by incompetent Joe Biden through open borders.
By wacky Joe Biden.
Borders. You probably hear open borders and you can't even understand it because nobody can understand. Nobody smart or with common sense can understand it. So We have millions of people that should not be in this country that are dangerous. Not just people, because we have people, but we have millions of people that are murderers, drug dealers. They've been allowed to come into our country by other countries that were very smart. When they heard that this very low IQ president, and by the way, I took my cognitive exam as part of my physical exam, and I got the highest mark, and one of the doctors said, "Sir, I've never seen anybody get that kind of, that was the highest mark."
Oh my God, dude.
I hope you're happy with that. Although they haven't been bugging me too much to take a cognitive. But I did do my physical and it was released. I hope you're all happy with it. I notice there's no question, so probably you are. But the cognitive, they said to me, "Sir, would you like to take a cognitive test?" I said, "Did Biden take one?" "No." "Did anybody take one?" "No, not too many people took them." I said, what about Obama? Did he take one?" "No, he didn't take one either." I said, "Let me be the only one to take one." But I've actually taken them 3 times already. I like taking them because they're not too tough for me to take.
Jesus.
But we had a great physical exam, so I know you're going to ask that. And the doctors who are total professionals, Walter Reed Medical Center, they're great people. And I visited a soldier that was badly wounded, incredible soldier, lost his leg, and we spent a lot of time with him. I mean, great with his mother. And it was really a very great thing. They do a phenomenal job. I just want to say, Walter Reed, I was there for, 5-6 hours. You were there with me. But I took a full physical, and it came out perfecto. So it's good. I mean, she got me for a little longer.
Would you also be willing to pay for those
Epic, sir.
facilities?
Simply
We already
epic.
do ones we're going to be built.
I'd do something. We'd help them out. Yeah, we help them. They're great facilities, very strong facilities, and they don't play games. I'd like to go a step further. I mean, I said it to Pam. I don't know what the laws are. We always have to obey the laws, but we also have homegrown criminals that push people into subways, that hit elderly ladies on the back of the head with a baseball bat when they're not looking, that are absolute monsters. I'd like to include them in the group of people to get them out of the country, but you'll have to be looking at the laws on that, Steve, okay?
How essential is it for you guys to be locking up these prisoners? And do you think more presidents should follow suit like you guys as far as taking a hard stance on crime here in the United States?
Well, I do. I think everybody has to. I mean, the president said it better than anybody. He said, you have liberty and you have to have liberty, but to have liberty, not everybody is going to be good. And, some are bad because they're sick. They're mentally deranged. They're bad.
Why do you
Then you have to take them. If you're going to have a country, you're going to have to take those people out. And we've been doing that. But this was like an unforced error, they would call it, where we had people that may hate our country, or maybe they're just stupid people. I think they're probably stupid people more so. A lot of people said they did it for the vote. But I did better with Hispanic people than they did, because I always use Hispanic. I did better. You people love me. I saw my poll numbers in your country up through the roof, right?
You people
91%.
love me, true.
No, some people think they do it for the vote. But they don't have to do it for the vote. They cheat, they're professional cheaters. That's about the only thing they do well. So we just have had a great relationship, and it's become bigger because of a strange thing that happened. I came back. We had no war in Ukraine. We had no war we had no October 7th Middle East problem. We had nothing. We had no inflation. We didn't have the Afghanistan, most embarrassing moment in the history of our country.
Got rid of the Afghanistan.
Not withdrawing, because I would have been I had it all set to bring people out with dignity and pride. That was the worst, most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, Afghanistan. We didn't have any of that. You wouldn't have had the war with Russia, Ukraine. You wouldn't have had the Middle East problem because Iran was broke. They had no money because we had secondary sanctions on and lots of other sanctions. And now every single thing, got a problem with Iran, but I'll solve that problem. That's almost an easy one. We got to solve a war that should have never started, Ukraine and Russia, and we'll get that solved. And we have to solve problems, and we already solved inflation. If you look at the numbers are incredible, actually.
Have you seen the numbers?
Stock market's up, and we're not letting other countries take advantage of this country like they have for the last 40 years. So thank you very much. You have a question, please?
Yes, Mr. President, thank you so much. You scored another major investment win this morning when NVIDIA pledged to build its AI supercomputer, the first time ever, right here in the United States.
Thank you.
AI supercomputer.
That's true.
What is your reaction to this announcement, sir, and how will this positively benefit Americans across America?
Well, it's one of the biggest announcements you'll ever hear, because NVIDIA, as you know, controls that almost the entire sector, which is one of the most important sectors in the world, between chips and semiconductors and everything else. And they're the biggest. And the other biggest we already have coming in is spending $300 billion, as you know. They announced 2 weeks ago. But NVIDIA is so highly respected. And
Yeah, that's. Do you think that will Trump continue to blame Biden when he's in his third term? What do you think? What do you think?
this was an announcement that a lot of people, I knew it was going to happen, but not to the extent that it happened. It's big. And the reason they did it is because of the election on November 5th and because of a thing called tariffs. As I say, the most beautiful word in the dictionary. After love, God, relationship.
True.
The press actually hit me and said, tariff is the most beautiful word.
And they were like, what about?
In the dictionary. What about family, love, God? I got hit even on that. You understand? I said, okay. So now I say it's my fifth most favorite word because they get you on anything.
Epic,
but,
dude.
No, that NVIDIA, it's one of the great companies of the world. Modern, super modern companies, controls segments that nobody, sort of controls the world in a sense, and they're coming in here in the biggest way with hundreds of billions of dollars. Not like millions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars.
Do you not believe the arguments about AI risk or not know them? I just don't think about them too much. It feels to me a little bit like climate change, to where it might be a huge issue, but we're just not even close to being able to deal with that right now.
Honored by it, and I want to thank Jensen and all of the people that we deal with. They're great people. They're brilliant people, and without tariffs, they wouldn't be doing it. Okay? Thank you very much.
Are you considering additional sanctions against Russia after their latest attack? And do you have an update on the rate and when you might announce semiconductor
Well, I already
tariffs?
have sanctions on Russia. I put them there. If you remember, Nord Stream 2, that's the big pipeline that goes through Europe. I stopped it. That's Russia's pipeline, the largest pipeline, I think, in the world. Goes to Germany. And I stopped it. And when Biden came in, he approved it. And then they say, oh, I'm friendly with Russia. No. Putin said, if you're my friend, I'd hate to see you when you're my enemy. I stopped the biggest economic job they ever had. I stopped it cold, right? It was dead. You know that, right? And Biden came in and he immediately approved it. What was that all about? And
the fake news media doesn't tell you about that.
It's a pipeline that takes care of a lot of the needs. Now, it was a very controversial thing, but I stopped it, and Biden approved it. Question?
You can't deal with it. Do you mean in a political sense or in a practical sense or in a theoretical sense? I mean, politically, we're just not united enough to deal with any problem. On a practical sense, unfortunately, I've lost all hope in any concept of a technocracy. I just think it's an exceedingly rare quality that an intelligent person's intelligence carries over past their field. So whatever's happening with AI stuff, I just wouldn't trust anybody that works in software to deal with those problems philosophically, because they've shown that they shouldn't be trusted with literally anything having to do with anything besides being basically a code monkey. If you look at the way the entire industry is like obsessively entered the political world in the most disgusting and degrading and humiliating and retarded way possible. So I don't know, seems like a fuck problem. Rip.
No, not you. Not
Update today on potential semiconductor tariffs and potentially pharmaceuticals. Semiconductor tariffs and potentially pharmaceuticals.
Pharmaceuticals, we're going to do. We don't make our own drugs, our own pharmaceuticals. We don't make our own drugs anymore. The drug companies are in Ireland and they're in lots of other places, China. And all I have to do is impose a tariff. The faster they move in. The higher the tariff, it's inversely proportional. The higher the tariff, the faster they come. And we're going to be doing that. That's going to be like we have on cars. We have, as you know, a 25% tariff on cars. We have a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum, and that's what that category fits right now.
Do you have a percentage in mind and a timeline?
I have a timeline, yeah, not too distant future. And we're doing it because we want to make our own drugs. We're doing it because we want to make our own steel.
You shouldn't base your opinions on tech bro demagogue corpos. The actual engineers are much smarter. No, I don't believe that. I'm sorry, but that's a fucking lie. The entire tech world is fucking beholden. You guys like suck the sweat off these guys' fucking nuts. You've shown yourself to be just as fucking retarded as any KKK member, any cult member, any astral projection believer, anybody that believed in any sort of whatever. Everybody, all humans have the same susceptibilities, and people in tech are absolutely not insulated from that. So sorry.
Aluminum, lumber, other things.
The faster we can H-1B in some Indians that aren't fucking retards, like I guess the white people in San Francisco, the better. The better we're off for it, okay?
And they're all coming in. We have record numbers, $7 trillion. Since I announced, like...
$7 trillion. The number gets higher every day.
Basically, since I came in. We have over $7 trillion being invested in the country. We didn't have $1 trillion. We didn't have $500 billion for some of these guys. They didn't know what the hell they were doing. So we have the largest investment that we've ever heard of, and we're only 2 months in. And that'll continue at levels that you've never seen before. It's going to happen. And even the stock market's up today. We also had, a lot of people didn't say it the way it was. We had the largest gain in the stock market in history on every single category last week. That was a nice game because we get a little hit because people didn't understand the power of our our country economically if you use it right. Do you have something to say on that, JD?
Yes, sir. I mean, look, for 40 years we have lost manufacturing capacity. Workers have seen their wages stagnate, and some of the most critical things that we need, from the pharmaceuticals, the drugs that we give to our children, the antibiotics that we give to our kids, to the weapons that we actually need to fight a war, if God forbid we had to fight a war, we don't make enough of that stuff. And so President Trump ran explicitly on changing that. Yes, as the president mentioned, it caused a little bit of disruption in the market, but I actually think over the long term, workers are going to benefit, stocks are going to go up, American businesses are going to benefit as we reinvest and reindustrialize our country.
And the auto workers and the Teamsters and all of the unions, not traditionally Republican, but I'm winning those unions by, we're up 40, 50 points on the Democrats. They're losing everything. And they're losing everything because
they suck.
They just have policies that are not believable. They fight for policies that are 5% popular, and nobody knows who the 5% are. I mean, nobody can find the 5%. But if you go back to Ohio, and by the way, we have the great championship team from Ohio coming in today, right?
Very big day.
And that's going to be a little bit later. And that'll be, if you want to stick around, I'll introduce you to some nice people. You'll see some very large people, right? You'll see some people that even you have not seen people like this. These are big. These are 6'7", 380 pounds with no fat. Okay, that's pretty good, right? But the team, the national championship team, is being honored today at the White House, so that'll be exciting. If you're around, you want to stay around, I'll have you up there. You can tell them all about your prison, how you have to behave. Okay. Who else?
Ignore the CNN lady. Don't talk to her.
You said yesterday that you're making a decision on Iran very quickly. What do you mean by that? Is that a decision to strike Iran?
Solve their problem very quickly. Iran wants to deal with us, but they don't know how. They really don't know how. We had a meeting with them on Saturday.
They're utterly clueless.
We have another meeting scheduled next Saturday. I said, that's a long time. That's a long time. So I think they might be tapping us along. But Iran has to get rid of the concept of a nuclear weapon. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. He can't have a nuclear weapon. Nobody can have. We can't have anybody having nuclear weapons. We can't have nuclear weapons. And I think they're tapping us along because we're so used to dealing with stupid people in this country.
Not anymore,
And
though.
I had Iran.
Only the smarties now.
You had no attacks. You would have never had October 7th. in Israel, the attack by Hamas.
What would you have done, sir, to make that not happen? Just curious.
It was stone cold
Notice how he never
broke
says that.
when I was president.
What would you have
And I
actually
don't
done
wanna
to
I
make
want
it so
them
we
to be a rich, great nation.
wouldn't have had that
Only
attack,
thing
sir?
is, one thing, simple. It's really simple. They can't have a nuclear weapon. And they got to go fast because they're fairly close to having one. And they're not going to have one.
Got to go fast. Santa.
And if we have to do something very harsh, we'll do it. And I'm not doing it for us, I'm doing it for the world.
So selfless.
And these are radicalized people, and they cannot have a nuclear weapon.
Does that include a potential strike on Iranian nuclear facilities?
Of course it does.
Just a follow-up question on
Damn! Was he supposed to say that out loud? Oh, shit.
You mentioned that you're open to deporting individuals that aren't foreign aliens, but are criminals, to El Salvador. Does that include potentially U.S. citizens, fully naturalized Americans?
If they're criminals and if they hit people with baseball bats over their head that happen to be 90 years old, and if they rape 87-year-old women in Coney Island, Brooklyn,
yeah, we're going after fully naturalized citizens. So now we are going after citizens. Okay, well that's good. So it was never really about green card or any. It's citizens too. Okay, that's good.
And what do you think? There's special category of person? They're as bad as anybody that comes.
Special category of person? Well, yeah, we call them U.S. citizens, but you know, we could also just not have that class of people anymore, I guess.
We have bad ones too, and I'm all for it because we can do things with the president for less money and have great security. And we have a huge prison population. We have a huge number of prisons, and then we have the private prisons.
Yeah,
and some
I
are
might get
operated
deported,
well, I guess, and some aren't.
Keep speaking like this. True.
But, he does a great job with that. We have others that we're negotiating with too. But no, if it's a homegrown criminal, I have no problem. Now, we're studying the laws right now. Pam is studying. If we can do that, that's good. And I'm talking about violent people. I'm talking about really bad people. Really bad people. Every bit as bad as the ones coming in. And I made the statement when I heard about this a long time ago now, 4 years ago. When I heard that this guy was having open borders, I said every single criminal from all over the world is going to be dumped into our country. And that's what happened. Jails. The jails of the Congo were emptied out. The jails of Venezuela were emptied out. And you know what happened? Their crime went way down. But now Venezuela has other problems. You know what the problem is? They have no money. Yeah. Because I shut off their oil, and we put secondary tariffs because they're not doing what's right over there. They know what to do. We spoke to them. I spoke to them.
Yeah. What are they supposed to do? What is that?
But they have no money. Venezuela has no money. But Iran had no money, and Iran behaved so beautifully. And then Biden took all those secondary tariffs on. I told China, you can't buy oil. If you buy oil from Iran, China, I told it to President Xi, then we no longer want you to do business with the United States of America. And those ships disappeared from that harbor so quickly. China.
They behaved so beautifully,
guys. Get along great with China.
Are the talks with Iran productive? Do you want to continue that? The talks with Iran, do you believe those are productive? Do you want to continue that?
I think Iran could be a great country as long as it doesn't have nuclear weapons. If they have nuclear weapons, they'll never get a chance to be a great country. Wow. They will never get a chance. It won't even come close.
Sir, on tariffs?
Yeah.
Yesterday you mentioned short-lived product exemptions. Which specific products are you considering, and how long is short-lived? Weeks, months?
I'm looking at something to help some of the car companies with it. They're switching to parts that were made in Canada, Mexico, and other places, and they need a little bit of time because they're going to make them here, but they need a little bit of time. So I'm talking about things like that.
What about any Apple products, other cell phones?
Look, I'm a very flexible person. I don't change my mind, but I'm flexible. And you have to be. You just can't have a wall and you'll only go. No, sometimes you have to go around it, under it, or above it. There'll be maybe things coming.
I don't change my mind,
Tim Cook,
but I'm very flexible. Okay.
Recently, and that
well, thanks for the clarification, sir.
I don't want to hurt anybody, but the end result is we're going to get to the position of greatness for our country. We're the greatest economic power in the world if we're smart. If we're not smart, we're going to hurt our country very badly. We lost with China over the Biden
Bigly.
years trillions of dollars on trade. Trillions of dollars. And he let them fleece us. And we can't do that anymore. And you know what? I don't blame China at all. I don't blame President Xi. I like him. He likes me. I mean, you know, who knows? Who the hell cares?
Do you have any updates on talks
But you know
with
what?
China?
Why?
What?
Do you have any updates for talks with China?
You know, let me just tell you this. I don't blame China. I don't blame Vietnam. I see their meeting today. Is that wonderful? That's a lovely.
If Trump essentially ignores the SCOTUS ruling as it looks like he is that it? Is there some enforcement? Yes, there is enforcement, but the enforcement comes from the executive. So for Trump, no, there would be no enforcement.
Meeting like
He has to
trying
enforce it
figure out,
himself.
how do we screw the United States of America? Don't forget, the European Union was formed to do just that. The European Union was formed to hurt the United States and on trade. And they get us on NATO because they don't pay their bills. But now, since I got involved, they have been paying their bills. I took in over $600 billion for NATO. Nobody took in anything. I mean, they were all delinquent. They had 8 nations out of 28 paid their
At what
bills.
point does the judicial try to get the military to intervene? The commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces is the president of the United States. The military or the judiciary has no authority over the military. At that point, it's just like coup time. If Trump ignores the Supreme Court, the more precise answer is, if Trump ignores the Supreme Court ruling, the only thing that helps at that point is a coup. That's all you can do at that point.
The rest of them were way delinquent. And I said, if you don't pay your bills, we're not going to protect you anymore. And the money poured in over 600. The Secretary General last week made that statement. He said, I've never seen anything like it. We couldn't get anybody to pay.
Impeachment? No. I mean, you can impeach, but I mean, if he ignores the courts, why wouldn't he ignore the impeachment? I mean, I guess maybe if you think he'll listen to that. I don't know why you would think he would listen to an impeachment if he won't listen to his courts.
Because the United States was footing the bill for NATO. Well, we got hurt there, and we got hurt on trade, likewise, European Union. And they've got to come to the table, and they're trying to.
Is an impeachment the check there? We are not, when somebody is willfully betraying their job, there are no checks and balances. Checks and balances are just supposed to be a way to kind of keep the system running in a way that everybody's kind of like checking what the other person can do when everybody's like playing by the rules, right? It's like, imagine you're playing Monopoly with somebody and they get super pissed off and they pull out a gun and they shoot and kill you. Like, nobody would say, okay, well, in the next version of Monopoly, we should have a rule that you can't kill anybody that's actively playing at the table. It doesn't work that way.
But the European Union has taken terrible advantage. They don't take our food products. They don't take our cars. We have millions of their cars, BMW, Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, many others. They come in by the millions. They don't take. There are no Chevrolets in Munich, I can tell you that. I said to Angela Merkel when she was there, as she was letting millions of people infiltrate Germany, which was not so good from, we would call them illegal immigrants, but she made them legal. But I said to her, and I get along with her very well, I said, how many Chevrolets do we have in Munich or Frankfurt? Why, none, Donald, none. I said, you're right. And yet we take in millions and millions of cars. No, those days are over. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Mr. President, can you comment on the FTC's case against Meta and Mark Zuckerberg? Thank you, press.
Thank you, Naive.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Let's go. Thanks, guys.
Wow. So that's it then, right? Isn't that kind of the last straw to break? If we no longer have separated branches respecting their authority, we've lost our democracy. To some extent, we have right now, yes. But we've moved past that line at multiple stages already. Like, we were testing it in the first month or two, and now we've like stepped over that line several times. When temporary restraining orders are being issued multiple times against your government, and the government is fighting on every single one of these, and then trying to take you to the Supreme Court to appeal and everything. And now they've lost appeals to the Supreme Court, and now they're still saying they won. We're past that point, yeah. So the judiciary is doing everything it's, I guess, arguably supposed to do. Congress should have impeached him, but Republicans won't because they're cucked. And so now we wait for midterms, or we wait for, or I guess a coup, basically. Yeah, that's all you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Does an impeached president just step down in good faith? Is there no enforcement mechanism for Congress? Yeah, he should step down in good faith. I don't think we've ever had anybody convicted in the Senate before. I'm not sure. I don't think we have. Yeah, everything kind of works on the assumption that everybody wants the government to work and do that, yeah. Wait, I need to use the restroom. Hold on 1 second.
No worries. Since he's gone, I just want to say, hey, everybody in chat, I appreciate how nice y'all have been to me when I come on. It's a super nice compliment to call me boring Pisco, or less good Pisco. You guys really treat me right. Temu Pisco, that's a good one. Work from home Pisco. Yeah. I hope y'all know, after I talk with him, I obsessively go back, find the VOD, and watch through the chat to see everything y'all say about me, because I really care about y'all's feedback. My name is Kafka Esquire in chat.
All right, what's up?
Not much. I've just been having fun with your chat. Hey, I got to watch your debates with your chat about billionaires. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions in there? I feel like either you're not fully fleshing out your entire stance, or maybe your thought terminating at some points.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Out of the gate, can you agree? Like, I want to just like have some stuff we agree on. Of like, if you're in the U.S., you can buy influence with politicians. And for now, let's just keep it to individuals. We don't need to talk about corporations at all. You can buy influence.
What do you mean by? Give me what you mean by influence.
Sure. So I can donate to, by influence, I mean that like my voice can be heard. Mm-hmm. I can have a politician either learn about my issues or possibly care more about my issues because they know that that I am going to donate to them, and if they help me out, I'll probably donate to them in the future. Right. I think that those are kind of two forms of influence you can have on a politician. If I buy a dinner to sit next to a politician, he might hear me and learn something and go, I care about it. Or he might go, this guy gave me $1,000. I want $1,000 in 4 years. So I might lean a little closer to this guy's values. So that's something that anybody in America can do, right?
they can do the donations and show up at the dinners. I don't know how much that necessarily would affect the people they're talking to, but sure, that's a thing, yeah.
Yeah, we don't need to get there yet. Okay, then would you say that some politicians are more influenced by donations or spending politically, not necessarily donations directly to them, but let's say a person that's spending money on political campaigning at the same time as a campaign is going on, some politicians are more favorable to that. They might respond more to that money rather than to, say, petitions or people calling their office. And we don't
if
need
that's
specifics.
been the case, I've never seen it. I haven't seen that ever demonstrated before. I think that's a thing, I'll call it a truism. Like people kind of say this, especially when we use terms like donor class, but I don't know if I've ever seen that happen or been demonstrated before. Yeah.
One second. Yeah. I'm not saying that all politicians are this. I'm saying that some politicians naturally will care more about the money than other politicians are, right? I think that just has to be true. Unless you don't think so,
if we're talking variability definitionally almost that's true. But the real question is, it's a threshold question. Will they ever care more about the money than the votes, right?
Sure.
Or the voter,
sure.
I guess, but sure.
And I think fair. But then I would say, if everybody can buy influence, and if some politicians are more influenced by donations and spending than others, rich people in that specific category would be more efficient or have more ability to influence these politicians, right? So let's say if a politician, just to really hypothetical or I guess autism it out, let's say a politician, 20% of the way you could influence him is through money. Rich people could capture that theoretical amount of influence of a politician easier than non-rich people.
They could, theoretically, yeah.
In my experience, I've donated political campaigns. I have done political campaign work, and I've done some that's not money based, right? I've done in 2020 I did a campaign that was about a local campaign about signing up people to vote and for mail-in voting, right? But I've also done stuff where we raise money. I've done stuff where I've given money personally, and from my experience, I have seen that politicians they respond to money, at the very least. If not influence, they respond to money. So then, whenever I look at
the issues so if we really want to get into this, so the issues we have to start defining, because the entire conversation is almost going to flow from the definitions of things, right? So here's the first thing I would say. Okay, when we say, do rich people influence politicians? Okay. That's not really what people are talking about. There's a few more things that we have for people to get upset about this. So what we really want to say is, do rich people influence politicians in a way that the politician will change their policy, in a way that contradicts what the voters might want, and in a way that's more likely to be harmful for society? I think that these are the things that are all baked into that. And it's those separate areas that come up more in the later arguments that never get brought up as part of the first defining of things. Because, for instance, if there were some billionaires, and I'm sure we could probably find some, who donated a fuck ton of money for environmental causes, or I think Zuckerberg and Facebook, I think donated $10 million to shore up voting systems or something in 2020. People tend to not complain as much about these if they view them as good things. I'm sure Bill Gates has probably moved somebody in Congress on malaria or vaccines in Africa or some shit, but people don't complain about this as much. It has to be somebody who has unique access because of their money, and then they're making somebody vote in a way that they otherwise wouldn't. And then they are, usually these are things that are bad for society. It just benefits the company. Would you agree with all that, or would you take issue with that?
I think I would ask you, I'm going to give you, I won't disagree with you on that, but I'm going to ask you about kind of a perspective maybe that works within that still allows for us to have this kind of back and forth. I think that you would agree that politicians have a limited amount of time to engage with the public and learn about problems and understand problems, and not talking about anything that's any bad faith or things that would even hurt the public necessarily. But I think that rich people are able to capture that time and attention easier than, say, an average person would, right? A non-rich person. If I'm a rich person, right, buying that dinner.
Yeah, I think this is probably true. So one of the things that we would have to tease apart, because I think a lot of this is baked in definitionally to what we're talking about. So when we say a rich person can capture the attention of a politician easier than a non-rich person, and that rich person might have their ear more to influence them on policy to some extent. But I think one thing that we have to be careful of is what does that rich person represent, and why do they have access to that politician. So, for instance, a person that represents a whole bunch of other people in some ways is probably also going to be wealthier and might even use that wealth to get the ear of a given person. But it's not necessarily a function of their wealth for why the politician is listening. It's more what they represent. So, for instance, if you worked in upper management in Amazon, my guess is you could get the attention of almost any policymaker anywhere in the United States. But it's not just because you're wealthy. It's because you're representing the interests of a whole bunch of other workers and employees, and it's because you're representing also potential investment in their states. You could say maybe that's money, but like that's going to go down to their voters as well. So it gets a little bit, but I'm not going to say it gets anything, but like that's a thing to keep in mind, right? Because I would say that like just the money thing would be bad, but I think that representing the other things kind of makes sense. And it's probably how things maybe even should be. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure, and I think this is a little bit why I'm keeping it in the realm of just people, just individuals. Mm-hmm. But I was actually going to address this later on in our discussion if we got there. I think that whenever I look at members of companies or even owners of companies, if they're acting on behalf of that company, again, to influence voters, right, or to prop up politicians to become elected in some way, or support them to become elected, I kind of loaded that.
Sure.
I think that is very different than, say, the head of a union or the head of a 501c3 or the head of a local community, who essentially is getting the consent or getting the intentional political support to talk to that politician. Whereas whenever I think everybody loves to talk about purchases being speech and being political actions and things like that. But I think that the transaction that's happening whenever someone's buying something in a company that's owned by a billionaire, I don't think that person is saying, by buying this, I'm supporting you having a political voice that represents me, and I also think that this idea that they're representing the worker is also a little bit it's kind of shortchanging, because again, there's a transaction there. The worker's there to make their money,
sure.
And while they want the company to represent their best interests to keep their jobs, I think that. And as I said last time, I think that for me, I look at that more as something that is a legislative and lobbying issue, or the kind of mandate, rather than voter or putting people into power.
Mm-hmm. And I'd probably say maybe even more specifically on that, I guess technically they're not representing the worker. In a way, they're representing interests related to the worker, but they're really representing the shareholders, because we could conceive of a company where the company can represent an interest that's contrary to the workers, right?
That's fair. I actually didn't think about that for some reason, but that's actually a fair thing to say, in the sense that the company is representing the interests of the shareholders, and the shareholders, by buying and holding stock, are giving some form of consent for the company to advocate that way. So I will give you that one a little bit as far as kind of.
Sure, I don't think that changes anything significantly in either of our arguments.
No, not really. But what I'm saying, no. So, but even if all of that's true,
mm-hmm.
And actually with all that in mind, rich people, owners of companies, things like that, have the ability to take up space in the conversation that might have been taken up by individuals that aren't rich or own companies. And I think that at the very least, we can say that rich people are able to control conversations about politics and about things that need to be done, whether or not those are good or harmful to people, to the individual or to the public. I'm not making that statement yet. And I'm not even saying that they're necessarily against the public, but I am saying that because of that, they are able to weight their problems over other people's, right? So we might see things like expanded and better tort reform, or better or regulatory changes, before we see changes for like an oil company, before we would see changes to the the payday loans, right? Despite the fact that people probably want payday loans, the individuals would probably want that more than they would want reforms to the oil company. They might want both, but I think people would probably want one before the other. But I think it's easy to say that we're more likely to get this more corporate interest or rich person interest before we see an interest that's going to affect poor people.
I would say it really depends on what that particular thing is. Like, I don't know if I would just write that as necessarily like a rule, but it's possible. Okay. I'm not going to say that would be impossible. Like, I think that we could conceive of certain like exotic things related to regulations that ordinary citizens would just never even think to fucking lobby about or talk about, that a corporation could have their interest heard for a variety of reasons. Sure.
And I'm kind of trying to corral us into this area where I'm looking at money spent during political campaigns for influencing voters and for getting politicians elected as kind of a market. And I see billionaires, and I think I agree with you that, I forgot to give this preface. I agree. I think the billionaire language is dumb and is a really bad talking point in the grand scheme of things. Though I would say that rich people or the wealthy are people that I would be addressing here, because I think those people can monopolize these markets in a way that is really, really hard for individuals to combat and for the public to combat. And I think that it's less about kind of getting elected and more about kind of what the conversation is about, and how their will is being enacted on the government, right? So when I look at, the two great examples that are in my favor, obviously, are Donald Trump and Elon Musk. I think that Donald Trump, he was able to become president. I would say on the back of him being a billionaire, but I think he, like Steyer, like Bloomberg, and the other billionaires in the Democrat Party, were able to get on the stage of the primary because they were billionaires. I don't think there was a reason for them to be there other than the fact that they were billionaires. And then at that point, the rest of them failed the sniff test, and Donald Trump succeeded for reasons that he wasn't a billionaire. But getting to that stage, there is no individual that could have gotten to the stage like Donald Trump did with so little effort by comparison. If you look at the way that these other politicians got to that stage, there are decades of public work behind them. They are working in communities. Whether you agree with them or not, they're trying to make these outreach, they're trying to reach out and build these coalitions behind them to get to that stage. Meanwhile, Donald Trump makes up some shit about Obama's birth certificate and says some mean things about Rosie O'Donnell, and then he flashes some zeros and is able to be on stage with those same people. And so he's kind of, again, he's showing up.
I feel like I understand what you're saying, but like Trump wasn't there as a function of his wealth. I feel like this furthers one of the other arguments I was making, in that there are always ways to have unequal power in society. And it might just sound like a meme or a joke, or like I'm just saying random words when I say like social capital is also a type of capital. Trump got to where he is because of his social capital, almost explicitly, or I'm sorry, almost like solo because of that. Because Trump was there because everybody knew him as somebody from The Apprentice. That was the only reason why Trump got it as far as he did. It had nothing to do with his wealth. Now, maybe we could go further back and say, well, he was on The Apprentice because he was wealthy, but go ahead.
Okay, and let's address Trump, and then I want to address the other Democrat billionaires. With Trump, though, let's make that an extreme hypothetical of, what if Al Capone was alive and he never got convicted, and he's really well known, he's got all the social capital for being a really cool, badass gangster, committing crimes and all these things. And he shows up and goes, I want to be on the stage. And they go, well, this guy's got a lot of social capital. And it's not the same as these other guys. But you know what? Let's just get him up there, right? I think that we can recognize, I agree, there is social capital. But I think we can also at the same time say, well, there's certain types of social capital that we want to see in our candidates. And that might be something for the voters. And I think that's a fair argument.
Wait, I don't understand. Wait. I super don't understand that analogy there.
Oh, you're saying Donald Trump has social capital because of he's a billionaire and therefore he's able to get on the stage because that's his social capital? Or are you saying
no,
just him being the host on
because
The Apprentice?
He's a celebrity. He was from The Apprentice. I think it was a huge thing. Yeah.
Okay, then is there any other celebrity that has done that? Like that isn't a billionaire? Like I'm just wondering.
Ronald Reagan, wasn't he? I don't know how famous he was as an actor, but I know he was an actor.
But I believe Ronald Reagan had a political career prior to becoming a candidate for president.
Yeah, was he governor?
I thought he was governor of California, but someone can correct me. I try not to learn too much about him.
Yeah, I think he was governor, sure. But I mean, like prior to being governor, wasn't he just an actor? I don't know why people voted for him for governor though initially, but I mean, governor is that's a big political position to step into.
Sure. But I mean, I feel like whenever I'm looking at that, and if that's the case, I don't really have a good argument against what you're saying there.
Well, I mean, I would agree largely with what you're saying, in that I don't think other people have done it before. But I would also say that, like, I mean, Biden was one of the poorest people in the Congress or whatever, right, when he was a senator. So yeah. Biden wasn't exceptionally wealthy, but he had the history of public service and everything. I would say that our political environment has changed quite a bit in the world that we're entering now, where celebrities do have a lot more power there. Like that, I don't think it'll be popular in a couple of years, but people were talking a lot about like Stephen A. Smith running for president, because of how popular he is. That isn't necessarily a function of his wealth. Zelensky, I guess, was a popular comedian in Ukraine and did a lot of TV and actor stuff before he got to be elected president of Ukraine. Generally, it's like people with more public service and other stuff, but
Sure, I think what I'm saying here is that I think the public service of Biden being the poorest guy in Congress is a very admirable thing and something that I like to see. And then I think it's a natural reaction to see someone who essentially cuts the line by being a billionaire and gets there, and it makes me go, okay, this person very clearly is using his money.
I just don't think. How did Trump use his money to get there?
I can't give you specifics on that
Because I can think of a whole bunch of things he did popularity-wise like that. Because it was funny because you brought up the same thing I would have brought up, which was the birth certificate thing, right? That was the big thing that exploded him in 2015, 2016. Yeah, it was him doing the birther thing with Obama.
But he's not the only Republican provocateur that existed back then. He was not the only one. You know what? I can't say this for sure. I would bet he's not the only Republican provocateur who would have wanted to be president. I mean, I don't know. Kanye West certainly wanted to be one. But I think that whenever I look at Donald Trump, the reason why he got to the stage, I think you're right. All those things helped him get there. But if he didn't have the money to back it up, I think everybody would have said, "Who cares?" Or at the very least, he might have gotten out at the first round.
I mean, we can say that. And
even if he was known, he had less than 1% going into the first.
Yeah, but we can say that. What was the story? What were people saying over and over and over again? It wasn't the fact that he spent anything. It wasn't even about money raised. It was all the unearned media or unspent money on media. He had $10 billion in earned media. He had so many billions of dollars.
I think retrospectively, I agree with you. I think prospectively, at the time, I do not think that was it. I remember distinctly people arguing constantly that, well, he doesn't need to raise a lot of money. He is a billionaire. That gives him an edge. That makes him a good candidate.
People did say that, but they were wrong. He raised the most money, I think, of anyone in that election cycle. So.
Sure, but that's retrospective. We're talking about how he got to the stage.
Well, yeah, but how he got to the stage.
Do we let him on the stage?
Yeah, but then you have a hypothesis right now. I just need one connection. How did he use his money to get on stage?
And I don't have that connection for you here right now. I didn't think that this was going to be part of it. But I'll say this: instead of Donald Trump, I separated him out. Let's look at the Democratic candidates that were billionaires that got on that stage who nobody voted for or cared for. Right? Whenever we look at them, do you have did any of them create a fake birth certificate about Donald Trump? Did any of them have some kind of wacky zany thing? Maybe Bloomberg. I might grant you that one. He did some kind of weird shit, I remember. But Steyer, I don't remember. And then there's a third one whose name I don't remember. And they were on the stage for way longer than they should have been. And
were they? No, they weren't. I don't think they were longer than they should have been at all. Steyer was there. He never was too popular. He was literally a single issue candidate. He only cared about climate. That was the only thing he cared about. You could argue.
Let me edit that statement. Let it my statement. They were there at all. Okay. Why were they on that stage? If not for being billionaires, if not for that, do you think those men would have been on that stage?
I have no idea. Weren't there like 11 candidates?
And there are millions of Democrats.
I would argue that Bloomberg is the best or closest example of like a billionaire trying to buy his way in, because Bloomberg was quite popular literally because of massive expenditures. You could argue that Bloomberg got as far as he did, I think, because of his money. We can point to that. But the second it came time for people to actually vote on people, like Bloomberg was crushing it right up until any polling or votes were done because he was spending so much on ads. But as soon as people went to vote, he got crushed and then he was like gone.
Sure, but I think you're looking at the outcome, and I'm talking about the conversation. I'm talking about in the moment, access, getting in there. What poor person with the amount of public or political life got on that stage who wasn't a billionaire like Steyer? Steyer, someone come on and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know shit that he did for anybody or was part of any kind of political movement before this, and then he got on the stage. I don't know how he is more deserving to be on there than any other Democrat that's out there, other than the fact that he's got a lot of money in his account. And if that's the case, it sounds a lot to like me that his billionaire status got him access and got him on a national stage to talk about his problems in front of people that other people didn't have. And
I mean, I guess it's possible, but it would be interesting to see like how, like I would just need like an actual fact to back that up, like. How did he use money to get onto the stage? Like the fact that he was just there isn't enough because it could maybe, I don't know, maybe he was a big environmentalist guy. Like again, that was a single issue voter thing. I don't know how he initially got enough money or enough signatures or whatever you actually need to qualify for the Democratic debates or whatever. But I would need at least one thing just to demonstrate.
I mean, it's you. Okay, so you think it's a too far of a leap to assume his billionaire status was, let's say, contributing. Would you say it was contributing to get him on the stage? Would you give me that?
Maybe a little bit. But my immediate thing, there are like a billion counterfactuals here for I'd wonder. If it was that easy to become president, why wouldn't every billionaire just run for
No,
president and get on
not
stage.
President. I don't care about president right now.
Well, that's what
I'm talking
Steyer
about
was. Or
access
get
to
on
the
stage. Sure, access to political primary, right? Why wouldn't we just see like 15 different billionaires or 20 different billionaires every single election cycle just be on stage in the primaries and running for office?
Well, I think because you don't need to be a president and you don't need to run for president if you're a billionaire. If you're a smart billionaire, or I guess apparently even if you're a retarded billionaire like Elon Musk, you don't need to run for president. You can use your money to influence people and get things that you want without having to actually go and become president.
Well, but then if I look at it
that,
but if I look at it that way, that seems like exactly the opposite of what's happening in the United States. No. Right now, so Elon Musk is a billionaire, sure. How many other billionaires' financial portfolios right now are being eviscerated because of Donald Trump? Like, shouldn't all those billionaires just be able to buy influence from Trump to be able to cancel all these tariffs and everything?
I don't know. There was a video that came out recently of Donald Trump standing in his office with a bunch of billionaires bragging about how much money they all just recently made. Maybe some of them got hurt. Maybe they made a lot of money. I mean,
do you think the majority of
one second.
Okay.
You wouldn't grant me that Steyer's billionaire status helped him on stage. I am not going to grant you anything on this if you can't provide me the portfolios of these billionaires showing me they lost all this money. Because I've seen things saying, no, actually, they're taking advantage of this situation quite well. Warren Buffett is sitting on hundreds of billions of treasury assets hoping to score on this big loss.
Warren Buffett is explicitly the only one that's benefiting, and that's because he bet against the entire U.S. market, meaning definitionally every single other person who has a whole bunch of U.S. stuff is losing. So I don't know if Buffett
I don't think definitionally that. I think that he might have a better position than others. But
no, his position was cash, which is saying that the market is going to suck shit. So definitionally, yeah, unless everybody else bailed for cash, which they didn't, because you can see the top 20, I think, gains or losses of the billionaire people. And Buffett was the only one posting positives because he said, fuck the markets, I'm just buying cash now.
Sure. And to be fair, I'm well outside of my realm of knowledge. I know nothing about stocks. But I'm just saying, and I understand what you're saying, well, why aren't the billionaires doing these things? Well, the billionaires are currently trying to curry favor with him. You yourself constantly quote, that was rude. You yourself have quoted multiple times about how billionaires gave a ton of money to his inauguration party. There is no doubt in my mind that he is in contact with these people, extracting whatever from them so that he can give them favorable things. I
don't disagree with that right now,
but I would say he is aligning the government for their benefit. Yep. There are multiple things in there that help them make more money. And right now, yeah, it might be cold outside right now. That doesn't mean that global warming isn't happening.
I don't necessarily disagree with that right now, but this is an unprecedented era of corruption and horrible governance. I wouldn't say that what Trump 2 is doing is even comparable to Trump 1 or anything that's existed, at least in my lifetime. But I would also say that there are... Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so you think that right now we are in such unprecedented times that applying the facts of the current day aren't applicable to the system at large.
Absolutely.
I can't
yes. I would say absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
If that's the case, fair. Okay. That's we're just at a fact dispute right now, and we're not going to resolve that.
Sure. If somebody were to tell me right now, could rich people gain I think I said this a few days ago on stream that we're entering I think it was called privatization for Nazi Germany, the point of the economy where the dictator literally gets to decide who survives and who doesn't. So I mean, in a way, I think that we have already entered that with the tariffs, and so in that case, yeah, the wealthy people, or at least the domestically wealthy people, if all of your wealth comes internationally, then you might be fucked. Yeah, those people are definitely going to be favored, but I would say we're in a very unique position now compared to before, which also plays into my complaint about leftist messaging, in that when you constantly say, Bernie's been saying for 30 years, we live in an oligarchy, we live in an oligarchy, we live in an oligarchy, and well, now, maybe actually, but it's not the same as it was, even 2 years ago, let alone 10 or 20 or 30 years ago.
Sure, and I'm not going to defend leftists, but what I would say is, it's very interesting to me that looking backwards, retrospectively, I feel like I can see ways in which rich people and billionaires have used money to influence politics. And then now, whenever we talk about the facts on the ground, you are telling me we are in horrible, horrible times, unprecedented horrible times that benefits rich and billionaire people because of the political actions that happened over the last 8 years.
I'm not saying exactly.
I'm not being facetious. Sure. It feels like you're saying it kind of came out of nowhere. Whenever
I don't think the current situation is not benefiting most billionaires. If wealthy people ran the economy, we wouldn't be where we are right now. It'd be 0% chance. So I would point to the current economy as being the strongest example or evidence that shit is not being ran by the wealthy elite. Because if it was, nothing would look like it does right now. There might be some people that benefit, but it's not, and it's probably going to be the people who are the wealthiest that can take advantage of it to benefit. But it's going to be people that are trying to curry favor with Trump, not just the richest people.
Maybe we. Okay, let me have to ask this. If you want to, maybe we should edit the way we're talking about this, because we're talking about rich people like they're a monolith. I think it's very possible that there might be a group, a minority of rich people that coalesced this current form of events for their benefit, and did so in a way that abused the system that other rich people might have used to their advantage, at the detriment even of those other rich people, because fuck them, they're not you, right? Like, I think you said last time we were talking about this, Elon Musk committed crimes in these ways and laws wouldn't have stopped them. I think you're right, but I also think he didn't do something novel, really. He just did a very extreme version of things that are legal.
Wait, who? Elon Musk?
Yes.
I would say that Elon Musk absolutely did something novel. I don't think we've ever seen a person like him ever before, I would say.
Oh, okay. I would say that I don't want to make too strong of a statement.
A very simple question would be, can you think of a single other like social media owner that has like openly supported somebody else running for office and then used the entire weight of their social media platform to support that candidate? I can't think of anybody that's ever done anything.
In America, I would say no. I would agree with you specifically in America. But I think that what he's doing is not that far away from state-controlled media that just controls what people think and limits to what they can see. We see that in a lot of other countries, and I think that him doing that is very much just a extreme version. It's him taking up space. It's him monopolizing the space where people can have a discussion about politics and dominating it because of his wealth, right? I think that's what I think it's him monopolizing the ability to talk about politics by forcing everybody to talk about the things that he wants to talk about.
Sure,
right?
but
especially in the context of politicians.
Yeah, but it wasn't just a function of his wealth. Like that was, I don't know if that was an essential part, but it was definitely a really important part. Like you wouldn't need as much wealth. Like Jack Dorsey, for instance, could have done this before with Twitter, right? It was possible, but I think that something different is driving Elon Musk than just wealth, because wealth alone can't explain the insanity of everything that's happened, I would say.
I agree that there might be other factors, but like if we live in a world, let's say we live in a world where in the U.S. every single weapon is legal, whatever you make is legal, and we go, well, we've worked it out the way we want, that's how it goes. And then one day someone shows up and they say, well, I have a nuclear bomb and I'm going to blow it up unless you do exactly what I say. And we say, and then I say, wow, it seems like we shouldn't let that happen. Maybe we should tone back the amount of weapons people can have to like a certain point where they can't threaten this much. And then you turn to me and go, well, people could have built nuclear bombs before. People had that capability and they didn't do it. That means that we shouldn't limit this. That's what it feels like we're talking about right now, is that this guy, and maybe it's not just his wealth, and I don't know what you mean by that, because I don't know how else he could have bought Tesla.
Well, it's not just his wealth, because there are other people that have been that are just as wealthy as him that have never embarked on this type of.
I don't know anybody that's ever been as wealthy as him. But
no. He doesn't need his current net worth to have bought Twitter, right? And there are tons of people that could have theoretically bought Twitter. Well, not tons, but there's at least dozens more that could have bought Twitter, right?
Oh, yeah, I'll grant you that. Yeah.
So it seems there's something more driving him than just his wealth, right?
But I don't need his motivations to be wealth. I'm saying that his means are his wealth, his ability to do these things, to dominate. Because you're like, there have been politicians throughout history who did not become despots. They could have become despots. They could have used their power to become despots, but they chose not to. That doesn't mean that they couldn't have done it. And that doesn't mean,
but then I wouldn't say that like we can't have any more politicians because some might become despots then, right? That would be my rule from that. I would say, oh, okay, well, we need to.
I agree, but what I might say is we should have politicians where it is harder for them to become despots, or we put things in place where they can't become despots, right?
Yeah, I don't necessarily mind that. But then that's where the whole argument kind of gets weird, because it's like, okay, well, what's a policy change that we would do then to help with, I guess, the perception of this problem here with people being able to buy influence to places?
Okay.
What?
Well, okay, so here's where I think we kind of get into a bit of a thought termination whenever I've heard you discuss it in the past. So let's do some Citizens United.
Okay.
Let's do some. You can't make a political ad, let's say, so close to an election and unless you're in this part of this certain type of organization, and those types of organizations can only take donations of a certain size from individuals. Okay, so you got a 501, you got a 501c4, I think it is. No, that's a local one. 501c6.
Okay,
and then you can only take $10,000 per individual. Okay, and then rich people, they have to disclose the ones they make to those, and they can only donate $10,000 per year to total amongst all of these 501c6s. Okay, now they can donate $10,000 and to whatever their cause they enjoy, and those organizations can make their political messages near the campaign, but nobody else can make political messages within a certain amount of time of a campaign, right? And I think whenever this discussion comes up, you say, well, how do you know? What about these environmental documentaries and shit? And respectfully, you know the answer to this because you deal with this whenever you say people act like we can't mind read Trump. Well, we mind read people all the time whenever we do court cases and trials and things like that, and we do that all the time with expenditures in other areas. If you look at antitrust laws, there's a ton of this going on where they try to figure out, why did you spend the money the way that you did? Why did you buy this thing? What are your internal communications? What are your intentions? And they go through it. And it's not easy or cheap or fast, but we can do it. We have the capability to do something like that. Now, it wouldn't be prospective, it'd be retrospective, but we'd create an environment where we punish people for exhibiting influence. And so, I mean, if I'm out of line, and I'm, if that's not what your arguments are, I'm happy to hear.
Well, but I said like a billion times. Yeah, I mean, I've said over and over and over again. Like, if somebody wants to have that discussion, like I pair those messages together all the time. Like, figuring out how you're going to regulate the speech here is incredibly difficult. But I think it's a good conversation to have. I talk about First Amendment shit all the time. That Americans are fucking retarded when it comes to free speech, and we just use that as an excuse to not analyze anything. It's a difficult conversation that we need to have, but people don't seem to be willing to have it all the time. But I have no problem like engaging in that conversation. Sure.
Okay. But and I would agree with you that the problem is that whenever you if you were to try to have that conversation with an average person, that average person would turn to you and say, yeah, we need to get rid of billionaires, right? And I think is that where you're saying your frustration comes from? Is that
that's the bad policy prescription part. Yeah, is that people seem to try to seek to limit wealth rather than to seek to reanalyze what is a political message, or what does that look like, or what does funding that message look like?
Okay, then I would. Tangential to this conversation then, as far as political messaging, how do you feel about like the idea of like people taking anti-competitive actions in a political space? And I can go into that deeper if you're not sure what I'm saying.
Anti-competitive economically, or anti-competitive, what do you mean?
Like, as far as like thinking about political speech as a marketplace, right? And we say that you can be competitive, you can have this marketplace of ideas where you have these ideas competing, or you can have people do things to try to shut out the competition, to make it where people don't even start to speak in the marketplace.
Well, I mean, it's going to depend on what we're talking about, like, because we just talked about a way to shut people out, like, and I would agree that, like, talking about what the types of expenditures you can make in some cases might be good, but that would be shutting people out. But that wouldn't necessarily be bad to shut some people out, right? If they're able to spend a ton of money on a thing, sure.
Sure. But like, okay, so let me give you an example that I've seen put forward is the Koch, well, in the past, the Koch brothers funded I believe it was a PAC or a super PAC that lobbied in Wisconsin to get rid of, to fight against unions, okay, and to make union laws weaker. And as a result, it's estimated that union membership fell by about 70%. Or it fell by 50%. And then dues to unions fell, obviously, because of that. And then you saw political expenditure from unions fall by 70%. So now what they've done is they've made it where the space is easier for them to capture for less amount of money going forward for anti-union rhetoric, right? Now, I'm not saying that necessarily that kind of conspiracy existed there. Let's say it did. Let's say that conspiratorially they were saying, not only do we want to get rid of unions, we want to make sure that people that are pro-union don't have a voice, right? Do you agree that there's a difference between those two things? That fighting against unions and preventing people
Yeah,
from
I would say
speaking.
so. I think a really good example of this is in my great state of Florida. I don't know how they did this because I don't know how the state legislature works, but supposedly or not supposedly, but somehow I think using 51% of the state legislature, they made it so that when they put abortion up to a referendum, you needed like 60% of the vote on that. So not only did they basically get rid of abortion in Florida, they made it harder to even bring it back because of the vote total that you would need. So yeah, I would say I'm generally opposed to things like that. Yeah.
Okay. And so then like in that case, right, I think that like, even if that's like, if we were to make that illegal, or if we were trying to say, okay, we're going to put a commission together to try to prevent actions like that. If you want to campaign for something, if you want to, lobby for something, do it. But you can't do it in a way that is intentionally preventing other people from speaking, or like an unfair way that would make it where, compared to other political actions, it's more difficult, like in the abortion case, right? I think that one of the number one things that would come up there would be, well, political expenditure is obviously an issue here. That is very clearly a way that people can try to shut out other people's voices.
I guess it depends on I guess the challenging thing would be like, again, it's going to be that like, well, what counts as that? So for instance, let's say that a city council has it so that every 2 years they do a review on some environmental regulations, and some people are upset because every 2 years there's a huge fight over it because the coal lobbyists come in and they make it so that they basically every 2 years they keep getting these more favorable rules written towards them. Well, let's say another group of people gathers the votes or raises the money or whatever, and they're able to overturn that. But now they're not only going to make it so it can't be reviewed every 2 years. They're going to say now the state legislature has to pass a bill to review this. So now we've effectively shut that out. Like, would that be a bad thing there? Like, should that type of stuff be prevented, or?
Yeah, I think that is a good question. And actually, we're probably going to see a challenge of that kind of thing in the courts. Trump recently passed an EO that sunsets all EPA regulations.
Oh, I saw that fucking stupid shit. Yeah.
Yeah. So we are going to see kind of this question pop up. I would say that like I'm biased towards the judiciary and the legal system, and I think that we have a legal system that has the ability to address these questions and to create a test or find a line that we can do it with.
So wait, real quick. I understand that courts can adjudicate, and people need to be mindful that courts can adjudicate, right? So I've probably even argued on stream before. Maybe you heard me argue on stream. It's stupid to say, oh, you brought up like the mind reading thing. You can't mind read these types of things. Or I'm sorry, that it's stupid when people say you can't mind read, because we determine like intent all the time for a variety of reasons, right? One thing that is a little bit challenging, though, and I was sympathetic towards this rationale in Citizens United, was the law that was at play here. This was a criminal thing. Like, if you fucked up in terms of how you did your political thing here, like maybe even rightfully so, these were criminal charges. And one of the arguments that I don't remember who was writing the opinion for this. One of the arguments that the guy gave was people shouldn't be subject to criminal penalties on stuff that is insanely complicated and hard to figure out if you're even breaking the law. Like, we want to punish people who are clearly and knowingly breaking the law and they know otherwise. But like, if you fuck up and something was political speech or something, you didn't realize it, or you didn't determine, and now you're being charged with a crime, is a bad world to be in. So that would be something to keep in mind. Like, if we're talking about any of this stuff on a criminal level, the criminality needs to be quite clear, I would say. Yeah.
I agree with you in principle on that. Though, to quote you back to yourself, we are in unprecedented times, and it is hard. And seeing where our country is going, at least in the short term, it is hard to argue that is something that is a satisfying answer, in the sense of like, if in a year the U.S. doesn't exist anymore, but we say, well, at least we had clear criminal laws around campaign finance stuff. Right. Like,
I would consider breaking.
That's not a consolation. Right?
Sure, but that it's not a consolation the other way either. I think we've almost lost the country if we're saying we're going to start criminalizing stuff, and then we're just like, even if people can't figure it out, fuck them, good luck. I think there are a lot of other steps we could take before getting to that point, I think.
Well, but is that a better step than open violence? Right. Like is a more authoritarian United States that is not in Donald Trump and Republicans' favor, is a more authoritarian United States like that preferable to violence between political parties?
I don't know. I don't even know if that other thing helps us avoid that, though. I agree this is all stuff that should be looked at. I don't think that, like, having any of this. Right.
Yeah, I kind of Trojan horsed with the billionaire thing because we kind of agree on that. But no, I appreciate you talking to me about this. Also, I think one thing on kind of the way that you talk about it is you say a lot like, well, the races where people raised more and less stuff like that. And you addressed that in your chat pretty well or we addressed that with the callers in your debates pretty well. And I think that, overall I'm okay with your stance on it. But I would say that, to me at least, the biggest issue is not really about the people running. It's that, hey, look, they're spending all of this money that really can't be matched. So if they're doing this, if billionaires are doing this, where they can spend all this money, do you see how it might be unfair in the sense that they can target their message way better? Like, look at
Yeah,
the Democratic
you don't have to
Party
argue that
big
point.
net.
I agree. Like, billionaires are going to have, any wealthy person is going to have some advantage. I would just say that there's lots of advantages that exist for a variety of different types of people in society, and there's no way that you can edit out every single one of those. So the question is whether or not the advantage given by some amount of undue wealth is good or bad, or or how that can be countered without having massive downstream negative impacts on everybody. But yeah, I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh yeah, the playing field is 100% even for everybody. That would be ridiculous, right?
Now let's say, speech considerations aside, all that stuff. Let's say there was a way we got to it and we found a way to pass a law that works where spending less money, or, now we've capped how much money any corporation can spend at all on anything for politics, right? And we get to the other side of it. Do you see some kind of negative externality there that I'm not seeing? And if it's only a speech thing to you, that's fine. I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just asking, do you see a negative externality coming from this kind of capping of speech with money when it comes to politics?
The capping of, if we find a way to make it so that money gives you no influence whatsoever. You can't have more influence than another person, right? Like, everybody's going to have the same amount of monetary influence in politics. Is there some negative externality? I think
that
the hard thing here is, I think we just have to start getting into the examples of like, what does it mean to, and this really gets to the fundamental thing of like, is money speech? And I think it is. I think most people should agree that it is to some extent. The question would be, how do we limit it and what functions are we eliminating? Like, if I want to raise money to do a giant parade or demonstration, or if I want to raise money to, hire a bunch of speakers to do a big rally or protest or something, like, do I no longer have the right to do that in the interest of making things fair for everybody? Or like, that's a tough question to answer.
Can I ask you
Go
this?
ahead. Mm-hmm.
That's fair. And I don't discount you for not having an answer, because it's not like I can say one way for sure. Let me ask you this. Whenever you look at the First Amendment, what do you, and you've read some of the Federalist Papers, so what do you feel is the best argument for us to have the First Amendment, specifically around speech? Like, why do you think it is important for us to have free speech?
For you to be able to express political opinions and beliefs without fear of legal repercussions from government, I guess. That's the more. Yeah.
Okay. And so you would say like that free speech is being used to protect your other rights, right? Or at least identify problems that you're protecting some form of rights that you have with your speech. Because if you can't speak, then you can't bring it to attention injustices, I would say. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, sure. Maybe, yeah.
Okay, because and the reason I ask it that way is because, to me, I think that speech largely is a right that exists to protect other rights in the same way that like the Second Amendment is often portrayed, is that it is this right that we need, or else we will lose our other rights.
Sure. Although I feel like at that point, I mean, we can kind of make a constellation of rights argument, and that, sorry, not the dreaded penumbra of rights, but all of our rights kind of exist in this balance to protect all the other rights, right? Right. Like, if you don't have the right to due process, for instance, you don't have any rights to anything really at all.
I know what you're saying, and I agree mostly, but I would argue that like our life, liberty, and property rights all are the things that we are protecting the most with the constellation, right? That these rights are all overlaid over these life, liberty, and property rights, because those rights are the ones that we care the most about, and if we have to give those up for those other rights, we almost always choose not to do that, right? We try as hard as we can not to give up life, liberty, or property for any of these rights that are being used to protect them. And so when I look at using money as speech, then I kind of am sitting here going like, okay, well, are we protecting life, liberty, and property, And are we doing that of citizens and things like that? And I start kind of going down that road because I feel like you're right. We're getting to these really fundamental questions in our government and of our policy and how we engage with this. But as you say, we're in unprecedented times where now speech has such a different meaning and has so much more power. And
Yeah,
things
and
like
I
that.
don't. If we're gonna do the unprecedented times thing, and then we need to like be mindful of that. There are so many more important things I think that we need to deal with right now than billionaire stuff. I think there are way more pressing questions, like how do we, like, what even do we think a democracy is? Because Americans don't feel like there are way more fundamental ideological questions I think at play. Yeah.
Agreed. But that is something for me. Whenever I was hearing a lot of these discussions, it was okay, and why that question of the negative externalities is we have given up speech rights in different places because we think it serves to protect rights that are more important, and often whenever we make those determinations, especially in courts, it is weighing the balance, it's balancing those rights, it's seeing how narrow it is, it's seeing, if there's no other way to do it and things like that. And for me, whenever I look at this kind of restriction on political donations, and I can even qualify that even more to make it even more narrow if needed, I'm having a hard time finding the negative externalities when it comes to our democracy. And that's why for me it's hard to a lot of the times, even if I might not necessarily agree with a lot of the rhetoric and things like that, I have a hard time disagreeing with, we probably need to focus first at these billionaires, or at the least very rich, who are abusing those things. And you've already said you're willing to talk about it. There's not good discussions about it. But I think that a lot of the times it feels like we're like, oh, we've got these speech considerations. We got to think, corporations are allowed to have speech and things like that. And I think that is shortchanging a lot of the other side of the balance, where we need to say, okay, well, what are we really giving up if we do that? And I don't know. I'm getting to a rambling point at this point. So that's kind of where I was going with it. And I appreciate you talking to me about this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, I appreciate the conversation.
Let me see. Oh, did you read through the rest of that guy, or you watched through the rest of that Donald Trump video where they talked about them winning in the Supreme Court?
Yep. Big 9-0 win. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, there is a case now that just got filed in Texas for the other case, the Venezuelan case, for habeas claims. So I'm monitoring that. I'm probably going to do a write-up at some point if anything juicy happens in it. But at this point now, they are actually trying to get them out under habeas in Texas to try to kind of call the government's bluff on this stuff.
Sure.
But most people are saying that those courts are pretty unfavorable to them, so it's unlikely that'll happen. But just thought I'd give a small update since we talked about that in the past.
Cool. See what happens.
Everybody go read Pragmatic Papers. There's a lot of good stuff in there. And have a good one.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Talk to you later. Be careful.